Yeah, we're going to be talking about optimizing CAD and BIM workflows for remote work today. This is actually the third part of our 5 webinar series. And going to continue to wait for a few more folks to show up. Give another minute or so. Big thanks to Carson at the AIA San Francisco for hosting us. Along with myself, I'm Dave Monk, Rohit Arora from ArcSource, and David Eschker from ArcSource on the call as panelists and presenters. And yeah, looking forward to it. If you guys have missed out on any of our prior webinars, the last 2, last week's was pretty great actually on cybersecurity for architects. If you guys would like info on that, definitely email me afterwards and would be happy to send you a recording and some of the technology recommendations that we have in there. Okay. And now we're kind of at critical mass. So I'm going to step forward with the slides. So first and foremost for this webinar series, I want to take a moment to thank AIA San Francisco sustaining sponsors, both AIASF and ArcSource are sponsoring this, but the sustaining sponsors for AIASF are really the firms and companies that help make the chapter what it is. And these sponsors at the gold, silver, bronze, and copper level are outstanding. And if we were meeting in person for a lunch and learn seminar or another in-person event, we'd get to engage with some of these folks. And so just want to acknowledge them and thank them for their continued support, especially during the coronavirus era. And highlighting where we're at, after today, we have 2 more webinars coming up. Next week on the 21st, we have cloud technologies and project management tools for architects. And then on May 27th, the last week of May, we have disaster planning for architects, which is sometimes not enjoyable, but very important topic that we're going to be talking through, both disaster planning and kind of data backup strategies, business continuity strategies. All of these are in the category of, IT for architects, and all of them are having a kind of COVID-19 focus, but they're also broadly applicable to our digital practice beyond the work from home era. There's a website, learn.arcsource.com, for more info on these. Also, there's links there to the AISF registration pages. Also, if you guys are on this webinar, we do have a discount code called ArcSource2020 for if you want to get free registration for the last 2 webinars, okay? And there's my email. So I want to briefly tell you a bit about ArcSource. This is some of my team working from home. We're a team of 20 professionals doing IT for architects. We really focus on empowering architects with best-in-class technologies. We want to help you guys make great buildings. For us, it's all about high-performance hardware, software, predictable IT environments, great security, infrastructure, and strategy. We've also had an interesting set of conversations in the last couple months about new firms launching. Several of my clients and colleagues are launching new design firms, which is an exciting thing, and also something we specialize in helping small firms get started. And kind of wherever we meet folks, we help them transform their IT to awesome and rock solid. And we've also got some great recognition the last few years from some the kind of North America IT provider space. These are some of our cool client logos that we work with. We've helped over 300 firms in the last 22 years. And I've been doing speaking and continuing education at AIA San Francisco since 2006. But bottom line, I just love helping architects at the intersection of technology and practice, and being of service to this community. So this is a little bit about myself. I used to work at Trimble Griffin Hoslip Architects as a designer 90% of my time, and 10% as IT. I was trained in architecture and engineering, and then in 1998 pivoted and started out my company ArcSource. I've also been very involved in the cybersecurity space the last 5 years, and that's been very interesting. Rohit Arora is a CAD BIM IT specialist. He has over 20 years experience managing CAD and BIM at some very large architecture firms. He's also worked at several software companies in this space. He's been working with ArcSource for over 10 years as a consultant, and really has a lot of expertise on how to plan and organize, manage, and train folks for optimal use. And so he's going to be doing a good bit of the presentation today as we get into some of the specific technologies. So I wanted to start with a context slide. Typically, I start out webinars and talking about IT trends in the IT for architect space. The big ones lately have been cybersecurity, CAD BIM collaboration, which we're going to be touching on today in general. But I think the COVID-19 situation has been a big kind of interrupt in that. And so rather than talk through these trends, we're going to kind of look through the COVID-19 lens at a specific one. And then I am definitely interested in talking with folks about these other areas. I could probably talk for an hour each on these different topics. So would be happy to engage in conversations with you guys and be a resource after today. So one interesting thing that I'm seeing is a bunch of unique opportunities for design firms. For some of us, it's new skills that we're having to develop around work from home and time management and project management. But the cool thing is that these new skills are going to endure beyond COVID-19. Also, there's a whole set of new technology tools that we're putting in place, and again, of necessity, but they're going to have a lasting impact. Also, there's lasting ROI. When we invest in technologies out of kind of essential urgency during COVID-19, those tools and technologies are going to have a lasting return for us. Also, some of the new workflows that people are creating during COVID-19 are really giving rise to new offering opportunities, new services they can offer to their clients, new ways of design and project management. I think that's really exciting, interesting upside of this situation. And change brings a chance for new stuff, as the blocks there at the bottom talk about. Anyway, I think that is just a really cool thing. And I did want to share with you guys, there's a couple of Autodesk free resources related to COVID-19. They're offering free BIM 360 access for 90 days. They're also offering free AutoCAD web and mobile versions. And they're also offering some free learning resources, including Autodesk University. There's a customer success learning hub and the community websites. So this is a really cool set of extra resources that they've made available if any of us have downtime. While we're at it, I wanted to see if we could have you guys as attendees fill out these polling questions that should be popping up on your screen. Interested to know the audience, even as we're talking through this stuff. What's your firm size? How were you working remotely before COVID-19? What CAD BIM tools do you use? And then lastly, what email platform do you use? So this is just helpful for us as we talk through this, and I can kind of customize some of our comments as we go, okay? So I wanted to talk really big picture about these remote workflow options at kind of a 30,000 foot view. What we're seeing, the top three strategies are that we're seeing and recommending are what we call high performance remote control technology. This is where we're using computers out of the office, either personal or company computers, to remote control the systems that are in the office. And we'll talk through that. Another one is that we're using a lot of VPN to do remote access to the office to get files and or connect to machines and servers in the office. And the third common one we're seeing is a lot of our clients have done some or all having employees and staff take computers home. And there's pluses and minuses to each of these workflows that we're going to talk through, especially in light of CAD BIM stuff. But more broadly, we definitely recommend maximizing the use of cloud technologies, both for communication, collaboration, project management. We're going to talk a lot about that next week in the webinar. But really, cloud tools like chat and project management can really kind of make up the gap between being in person and being at home. Also, Bluebeam has offered a 90-day free trial, and we're seeing a lot of great results, people adding Bluebeam to their workflows for PDF collaboration and markups. You know, another cloud technology we're seeing a lot of folks use is Zoom, like we're using for this webinar, but Zoom and Google Meets, GoToMeeting, stuff like that. There's a lot of great tools for working and collaborating on drawings. And then lastly, I wanted to touch on, we're actually very actively at ArcSource working on what we think is going to be the future of CAD BIM workflows. You know, we're not developing hardware and software ourselves at all, but, you know, we've been pursuing this space for a long time. And you know, I think with the advent of higher performance internet connection and improved cloud technologies, we're actually going to see a whole new set of possible workflows in the next 5 years. Maybe things that will remove the need to have servers in offices. Maybe opportunities to have virtual desktops that are much lower cost and do all the heavy lifting in the cloud. So I just want to paint a picture of that's coming in the future. And some of the strategies that we're going to talk about today are really about, you know, maybe setting the stage and managing expectations for that future. The last thing I wanted to touch on before I turn it over to Rohit is what we're kind of calling the tech mastery at the office strategies. The biggest keys to success here are going to be focusing on the best internet provider types. Fiber internet is going to be by far the best. Next is going to be coax technologies like Comcast. And lastly, copper-based technologies, which might be anything from AT&T to gosh, a dozen other vendors that use traditional kind of DSL or bonded DSL technologies. Also, the #1 driver of high performance at the office for remote workers is the upload bandwidth. And what we found is that, you know, maybe Comcast 75/5 plan works fine when you have 1 or 2 people working remotely. When you have a firm of 10, 15, 40 people working remotely or more, the 5 megabit speed is just not adequate. So we've been recommending bumping up the upload bandwidth. And then also firewall performance and security. The firewall appliances that many small businesses have are, if they're older than 2 or 3 years old, are generally not capable of high performance remote access work. And so we've been definitely recommending improving the specs there, and be happy to make some technology suggestions for you. And then definitely focusing on VPN technology. And then the high performance remote control tools, there's about 6 or 10 of them out there. We have a short list of the 2 or 3 best that we're going to talk about in this webinar. Okay, so Rohit, going to have you talk through what we're going to go over the rest of the presentation.
Sure, definitely. Thanks, Dave. So we will be looking at these topics. So that's the remainder of this session: Autodesk licensing, cloud options, how to optimize AutoCAD, Revit, and SketchUp. These 3 being the most popular software that everybody uses. I'm going to take the opportunity to end the poll unless anybody still wants to answer, but we should probably close the poll now.
Sure. Also, folks, as we go, please feel free to use the Zoom chat or the Q&A feature if you want to ask questions as we go. We welcome questions anytime, and myself and David will be looking for those, and then we'll pose them and answer them at the right time. Okay.
So in terms of Autodesk licensing, as Dave mentioned earlier, Autodesk has extended the access program until end of June. So do take advantage of that. But take a look at the specific products that are falling in this category. And we don't know as yet if they're going to continue beyond June, but it's a possibility. What you should consider is, okay, what's the game plan after the free trial ends? How are you going to continue the workflow? Are you going to buy in? How many do you need to buy in? And one thing to consider is that if you create some projects, are they portable to your new paid plan or not? So some things to look forward to. You should plan ahead. Then look into the home use rights. If you are already a subscriber of Autodesk products, you can use the home use. So your individual license allows 1 home use right. So somebody who's working from home can get that license. The other option being, if you have network licenses, which will eventually seems like will be phased out, but you have a network license, you can borrow a license, and that way you don't have to keep connecting to the license server every time you launch your Autodesk product, be it Revit or AutoCAD. So consider borrowing a license. That's an option. The next one. So looking at cloud options, given the scenario that everybody's working from home, you should look at the cloud options that Autodesk offers. We acknowledge that the branding is a bit confusing, and every year or every other year, they keep changing the brand names. But take a look at the family under A360. You have collaboration for design teams. They have a separate AutoCAD web app, which you can run on any device, on any browser, on your iPad or mobile device. It's a good alternative to carrying a full AutoCAD version on your machines. So you may not have a machine which is capable of running AutoCAD. This is a good option.
And it's also free right now.
It is free right now, yeah. So take a look at that. And then BIM 360, the licensing is per user, and it depends. The licensing fee structure is different based on what all you pick. But take a look at this as an option. BIM 360 provides you a lot of options for collaboration in Revit, for file sharing, and for file viewing. So you could send the file over a link to your client, and they can, without the need of installing AutoCAD or Revit, they can view the model. So very powerful there. There is another thing that you should consider. Autodesk Drive is a cloud-based drive. Currently, you have 25 gigs of free space where you can save and store your files. I have a small screenshot right there. And if you notice that there's a desktop connector, so you could install this desktop connector on a Windows PC, and it'll act very similar to Dropbox or Box, and you can have a map drive. So take a look at, this is an Autodesk-backed technology where you can host a lot of file formats that are supported by Autodesk.
Yeah, and this is brand new this year. And it's going to be replacing what used to be called AutoCAD 360, but it's a files platform and allows you to save files from AutoCAD. And this may be part of that kind of holy grail that we've been seeking for AutoCAD cloud integration for many years. So this is brand new, hot off the press.
And then you can share with respective clients in your team or even outside of your organization. So
yeah,
a very powerful free feature for now. So here are some AutoCAD power tips, especially given the scenario that you're working remotely. When you are accessing your computer in the office, turn off the hardware acceleration. Even when you're working, turn off hardware acceleration. Sometimes it addresses a lot of issues that you may be having. Then always install the latest service pack for your product and the hot fixes that Autodesk provides. And if you're still using Windows 7, change the theme to Windows Basic. So that will give you a little bit more bang out of the buck, I would say. Your AutoCAD is going to be less laggy and performance will improve.
Though
and
you
the
should
other thing,
still be using Windows 7.
That too, you should not be using Windows 7. It's no longer actively being supported, and it's a very old operating system. Windows 10 is great, by the way. To improve your performance in AutoCAD, under Options, under the Display tab, you should turn off the following three things. Showing tooltips. If you have learned AutoCAD enough, you don't need those. Rollover tooltips. So all of these, quick properties, these three things put pressure on the graphics card and takes away from the performance. So when you're moving your cursor, you want it to be as quick and responsive as possible. Then purge your files periodically. That includes the XREFs. So take a look at, if you feel that over a period of time your file performance has gone down, take a look at the XREFs as well as the main base file. And if you feel, even after purging, do a repair. There's an audit function. Try and do that.
Any questions, folks?
Yeah.
Let us know if there's any questions.
Yeah, if I'm going too fast, feel free to send a question. I can stop and answer them. I'm monitoring the Q&A. But yeah, definitely ready for questions. Third-party cloud. So why do you need this right now? You're working from home. You're working remote. You need access to the file. You need a way to share files. So if everybody doesn't have a VPN setup, they may be in a situation it's not working. These are the options you can look at. You can share through Dropbox. Ignite is a very powerful file sharing platform, because this is probably the only one which does one thing very well, which is the file locking. And especially with Revit files and AutoCAD files, this one distributes the file locking across your geos. So look at Ignite. A bit expensive, but the best performance. Then Box, Google Drive, these are free options. In third-party cloud, we are now looking at Frame, fra.me is the site, where you can virtually host a PC running in the cloud. So that means you can run this PC in the cloud, and all you need is maybe a Chromebook or a browser to access it. So that means people who are working remotely without a powerful machine, they can work as if they were using a powerful machine in the office. So something that's really working out well for a lot of firms right now. Paperspace, in a similar fashion, does the same thing. You can have a virtual machine hosted in the cloud. And then there are other private cloud solutions that you can look into, where you can think of your whole machine and the storage is living on a remote server, and all you do is connect via the internet, and you have a machine ready to work.
Yeah. And I would reiterate the caution on using some of these tools, especially Dropbox with AutoCAD and Revit. I mean, I would say don't ever use it for Revit. What Dropbox excels at is syncing files to multiple devices, and the locking of drawings, especially in projects where there's multiple people working on the same files, is very problematic in Dropbox. Google Drive and Box a little bit better, Ignite being the best, like Rohit said.
Right. So these are specific to AutoCAD. I mean, Revit definitely do not use Dropbox
Right.
or Box. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
All right. Now coming to Revit. So Revit in itself, as you know, is a much more complicated software than AutoCAD, and it needs very specific setups to be able to work, and it really excels at work sharing. So that's how you divvy up. You work off the same file, the same central file. You make copies on your local drive. So the best solution for collaboration in this scenario is using the BIM 360, the Revit Cloud work sharing option. This is the best way to collaborate right now. And this allows you to share your work with outside of the organization as well as from within. So it has a built-in user management that can give access to people in teams and outside consultants as well. The best part is you need no server hardware investment because you're not using your hardware server that's sitting in the office. You have to remember that Revit LT is not supported out of the box because you cannot use the work sharing in Revit LT. Revit LT is constrained to be used by a single person. You have to keep in mind that there's a recurring cost for each user. It's a named user, so it can't be that you can switch a user and give it to somebody else. It's a named user by their email. And then your connectivity to the outside world, the WAN, is going to have a performance impact when you hit the sync. So when that's the situation, you need to do a couple of things. So those are the two tips. You can reduce the work sharing display update setting, which means how often does your local PC, your local Revit session pings the server to see if there's a change or somebody else has taken an ownership of an element. So reduce that. And if you want, we can send you a direct link to that help page, but you can reduce that ping. Basically, it reduces that chatter. The other thing you should be doing is use something like a Slack, a synchronous chat application like Slack or Teams or even Google Chat to coordinate with your coworkers. When do you sync? When are they going to do save to central? So those are the things that you should plan ahead and always have this channel open.
Yeah. So there is a question, Rohit, about syncing files or syncing Revit files with Dropbox, etc. And yeah, definitely you don't want to be working live.
Yeah.
I would say one of the things that that Dropbox is very good at is the distribution of documents and files and models, sure. But what we have found over time is that even though you tell people to not open the document in the Dropbox folder, even though you caution them in a big way, they still do it. So what we would strongly recommend if you're using any of these file sync and share platforms for distribution of documents and drawings and models is to copy them out of those environments to do the work that you're going to do.
Exactly.
But I would just say also kind of pragmatically within Revit that we're talking about, BIM 360, both because of COVID-19 and because of the way Autodesk is moving. I know it's expensive. It's up to $800 per user per year. It is by far the best solution going. We've been testing it along with many other alternatives, especially for multi-location, multi-firm project teams. BIM 360 shines far and away the best. So,
yeah, it's very easy to by mistake, especially in a Revit file. You were clicking on a file and you can double click. It launches in Revit, and if you make it a central file, it can cause a lot of problems. So for sharing, it's fine, but it's very easy to double click and then make a change there.
Yeah.
Okay, the other option you may have already used, most people use the file server within the office, but some firms prefer the Revit server. Revit server, the software is included free with your Revit license. What is not free is the cost of setting it up on a Windows server operating system and a server hardware. So so if you already have a Revit server, that's something to look into. You can open it up from the firewall, and then your users can access the files from the Revit server. That's another way of working. You can set up a remote Revit accelerator, and then the users in a East Coast office or a geolocation can basically access a copy from the Revit server, which is acting as an accelerator. So there's a bit of IT involvement, but this is a solution that if you already have been setting up, can continue supporting your remote users. One thing to remember, this only supports the Revit file data, so your XREF CAD files do not work with it. So you will have to copy them to your local location and recreate the folder mapping. So that's a bit of legwork there. And it only supports single domain. That means you cannot share outside of your organization. So things to keep in mind, a lot of upkeep there.
Yeah. Rohit, there's a question about disadvantages of using VPN and remote desktop. We're going to touch on that on the next slide, but
yes.
Pay attention to, we want to pay attention to the ways that make that workflow better, whether or not it's VPN or others. So, yeah.
That's coming in the next slide.
Okay.
All right, so this is where we touch upon the VPN / remote desktop. So this is probably the most cost-effective, the easiest way to do things. As an office, you should have a basic VPN setup. If you don't, then you definitely need to talk to Dave. Once you have the VPN setup, which is a secure tunnel into your office, your users can work on the project data. Remote desktop technology comes free with Windows 10 Pro, Windows 7 Pro if you still have it, but again, go back to Windows 10 as soon as possible. So it's a free software, first thing. The security comes in because you are not really pulling the data to your local machine. You are working on the data that is still in your office, in your network, your corporate network. So your data is kind of secure right there. You do need a VPN setup for a computer at home and the tunnel to the office. There are some limitations because you are working off a tunnel. You have to consider what is the out pipe from your office. If everybody in your office is doing the same thing, then there might be constraints on the bandwidth you have coming out of the office. So you'll have to probably dial down a few things right there. So you don't need higher resolution, for example, when you're working on the CAD file. It's a black background. You just need to see the cursor and few basic colors. So you can dial down your resolution and maybe reduce the colors that you want to see. So you have tweaks in remote desktop where you can reduce the quality and still be able to work. So look into those options. If you are working off physically from the physical distance between you and the office, that will hit your performance. So that's just physics right there. You can't make a change in that. So be aware of that situation. And we have seen as a remedy, you can use, instead of using remote desktop, you could use TeamViewer or Splashtop. These are different remote technologies. One thing you should also consider is, maybe I touch upon another slide there, remote desktop disables hardware acceleration. So if you're using remote desktop, you are not taking advantage of the high-end graphics card that you may have on your machine at the office. So at that point, using TeamViewer or Splashtop is a better option. So if you want to do rendering, if you want to see how shadows look, those things should not be done over remote desktop because that's not going to be able to take advantage of your high-end graphics card if you have it on your workstation. So that takes you back to some other solution like TeamViewer or Splashtop.
Yeah, and TeamViewer and Splashtop are third-party paid remote control tools. The testing we've done with about 10 different technologies in this space puts TeamViewer at the top currently in terms of performance for CAD BIM applications, as well as some of the other features like file transfer. It's not cheap though, and it does, they have a few different licensing models, but we find that, generally the productivity gains you're going to have from using the right tool are going to outweigh the cost pretty quickly, especially when you have the whole firm working remotely. Rohit, there's a couple questions on the BIM 360 slide. which I guess I can go back to briefly, but one of them is having to do with template updating in BIM 360. Do you have any tips on that space? And also keynotes is still an issue in BIM 360. So comments
It
on.
is. I don't think they have solved that. It's a bummer. I mean, as a company, Autodesk should solve this. I don't think, last time I checked, they still have an issue with the keynotes.
How about template updating?
Template updating, I am not 100%. BIM 360, like you have to start from your own local template, and then you upload it to BIM 360. That's the workflow that I will still advise. So template updating on BIM 360 is going to be a challenge because, and I don't know if it works very reliably or not.
Yeah. What we're recommending is maintaining standards off of the BIM 360 platform.
Yeah.
And I would also mention with BIM 360 that there are several subtleties around the backup of BIM 360 hosted data, and we're going to cover that. We're going to cover that in the webinar 2 weeks from now on the backup and disaster recovery piece. But generally speaking, in a sentence, especially during COVID-19, we're recommending, cloud backup of individual workstations that are actively involved in BIM 360, from home computers that are actively involved in BIM 360 collaboration.
So to summarize, these two questions from Prashant Mahakali, I would say you still have to do some things locally. That includes the template updating. I would not rely on BIM 360 for doing that, and keynotes are still a problem. There's another question that probably you can answer, Dave. How do you quantify acceptable upload speeds for an office internet connection?
Great. I would start with a firm size index. I mean, I think that 15 megabit upload is the new low probably, but really if you're moving above 10 employees, we would recommend pushing above 30 to 50 megabits upload
How about
speed.
35 people? I think they have a specific number.
35 people, I think we're going to be recommending getting something in the symmetrical space of either fiber or copper up, above 100 megabits. There's several fiber companies in the East Bay and San Francisco that are offering very compelling pricing, even as much as 1,000 megabits both ways. So the cost of bandwidth is coming down. Yeah, so there's a few subtleties, but and certain neighborhoods in San Francisco and certain cities in the East Bay just are limited in what their options are. But I would push above 100 megabit minimum for a firm greater
so
than
300 megabits per second for an office of 35 should be a good one.
That would be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can go on to the next slide.
Yep.
So in all of this, just wanted to quickly touch upon options for rendering plugins. Because we need to figure out a solution. If you don't have a high-end machine with you, there are some other solutions you can look into. So Autodesk Cloud Rendering is one. It is an add-on subscription. You can look into the Enscape plugin. Lumion is another one, which does a good job. Again, these two, in fact, most of them, other than the cloud rendering, do need a high-end graphics card available to you. So you may have to figure out a way of doing this on a high-end machine in your office, or if you have one at home, that's good for you.
Yeah, I can touch on this briefly. Also, we're recommending for home users either bringing home a high-end machine for 1 or 2 people that are going to need to be doing the rendering work for the firm, or in a couple of our clients' cases, they're actually sending people into the office to perform their work in an otherwise empty office on those high-end machines. yeah, it's just too important to have the computing power, close at hand. We are seeing, quite a few complaints of underpowered home machines. One of our clients bought, 24 new laptops as soon as the shelter in place was ordered. I think the ways to be the most productive in this space are to just make sure you're using the highest end machine possible. And we were going to have an event at AIA San Francisco this month where we were doing hardware demos on these different levels of machines, kind of like the $1,500 machine, the $2,000 machine, all the way up to the $10,000 machine. So you can really see the bang for the buck. So hopefully later this year, we'll get to reschedule that event where you can really see where these specific type of rendering tools can shine, and what gets you the results that you'd like. So
the other thing to consider, maybe this is a solution where you can use a cloud computing machine like hosted by Frame or Paperspace. So that could be another alternative solution to this one. Instead of buying hardware, you could just rent it on the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Twinmotion and Datasmith are other two offerings from Unreal Gaming Engine. So it's a gaming engine, and they have done these two things specifically for the AEC market. So if you have somebody who's familiar with that technology, these are the two other options.
Yeah.
All right, so the last software we want to touch upon is SketchUp. It's still used by a lot of architecture design firms to come up with basic modeling. One thing to remember, SketchUp cannot be run through remote desktop because it does need hardware acceleration. So the alternative is to use Splashtop or TeamViewer or run it locally on your machine, which is a little intensive. So you would need a capable machine to run that. And then if you don't have a very powerful machine with a graphics card, strong graphics card, you can do these things to get around the issues. You can use simple display styles by turning off shadows, textures, and special effects. And the other strategy is similar to AutoCAD. You can use a component, and you can use copies of the components instead of having copies of objects. And look at the instances where you have surfaces detailed with geometry. So instead of using geometry to make a flat surface, look at texture that can do that. So that's going to save you a lot of compute. And then use purge unused command or the tool to periodically clean up and improve the performance of SketchUp files.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of issues with SketchUp over time where the bloatedness of the model becomes a real issue, and all of the issues that Rohit just mentioned, but especially the using copies of objects, or one of our clients was modeling trees in the background with something like 30,000 individual leaves in the model, and it was just taking a ton of time to move the model, and they weren't even really interested in the tree. So definitely being careful of the size of the model. That's one of the biggest drivers of SketchUp performance at home or in the office. So, yeah. Any questions on the SketchUp space? No. So we might be close to the end of our slides, right? Rohit, can you give some kind of summary points on this stuff around the three tools that we talked about?
Sure. I mean, in general, you need to plan ahead and then consider, okay, what is your work type going to be? Is it going to be basic drafting? Is it going to be a little bit more 3D intensive? Are you going to do rendering? And based on that, you should start planning on your needs for both software and hardware. And as you can see, not everything will be handled by one single solution. RDP, remote desktop, is free, but it can't do hardware acceleration. So those are the kind of things you need to probably look through these slides again and see, okay, what is the kind of work you're going to do? Which software are you going to be using the most? And every platform solution that you have has a downside and a plus side. So you will have to look into that. Like, for example, BIM 360 is still not supporting keynotes. So that's something that you should be aware of. So those are the things that, if you have questions, you can share with us, and then we can do a little bit more research, because these things, the feature set is always changing. And you can plan ahead and see, okay, what's going to be your need? And based on that, a solution can be crafted around that. And agility and flexibility is the key right now. So,
Yeah. Rohit, there's a question about when sending links to BIM 3 or from BIM 360 to customers, do they need an Autodesk login to view?
No, they don't. You can customize that link so that it doesn't require them to log in. You can send it to anybody who needs to take a look at the model. So you can do that. You can also make it private and constrain to only the people who have an access Autodesk login to be able to view that. So those are all customizable, but yes, it's not a prerequisite.
Yeah. And the other things that I would share kind of in wrapping up, especially in these three technologies, is that taking the short-term view of COVID-19, we're kind of all willing to, at least initially, we were all willing to settle into some, lower productivity or just kind of accept it as a necessary evil. But as we move into maybe a longer term, if, I read possibilities of California staying pretty closed for the rest of the year. If that's the way it plays out, then, we're going to be recommending implementing some upgrades and strategies, as soon as possible in order to make these workflows as high performance as possible. And, I would still say that architecture and engineering and design, and I would even say graphic intensive businesses in general are really one of the last areas where we cannot go all cloud yet in a high performance. But as cloud technologies evolve, as Autodesk evolves their both software and their data models and their cloud integrations, and as internet speeds continue to get better and better for less cost, I think that we're going to see long-term some amazing things in the next 5 years that that we haven't been able to do before. I do have one client that is deciding not to return to their office after COVID-19, but they're going to transition to a virtual firm. I also have several clients that have started as virtual firms and continue to be that, and it's kind of an established workflow, life as usual. But I think for the largest firms in the country that have multiple IT staff and CAD BIM management platform of dozens of people working on standards, those firms are using strategies still that are heavily reliant on in the office hardware. But again, that is the piece that's going to pivot in the next 5 years. So a little bit of promise on the horizon. I haven't been saying that for 20 years. I'm really only starting to say it in the last year or so, where I really do see some of these cloud technologies and virtual computing solutions as being viable, both performance-wise and price-wise. So then I would transition to this next slide here, and feel free to keep asking questions, folks. I know we're approaching the hour point in 10 minutes, so we definitely like to leave room for questions. Last week we actually touched on cybersecurity for architects and for firms. If you did not catch that webinar, I'd highly recommend that you email me to get a video recording of that, or just my slide deck. I think it was really interesting. There's some really scary stuff going on. And I think architects in general have a few unique issues. And then next week, we're going to be talking about cloud technologies and project management tools. You know, we've been curating a list of awesome cloud tools for architects for many years. And so, you know, I'm going to share with you what we think are the coolest, best ones going on these days. And also, May 27th, which is actually after Memorial Day, we're going to talk about disaster planning and business continuity for architecture firms. And, you know, the backup space has changed a lot in the last few years, but also the lessons learned from COVID-19 about disaster planning in general, I think are going to have implications that we're all going to want to take heed of, whether or not it's another pandemic, which, you know, hopefully never happens in our lifetime, or if it's other situations like, you know, building burning down for our office, or earthquakes.
Earthquake.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily, like I said earlier, an enjoyable topic, but it is, you know, it's a real thing. And really the businesses that do disaster planning are the ones that survive and thrive even through these kind of disruptions. So, you know, those are the last two topics again. So any questions, would be happy to stick online here for another 10 or 15 minutes. And, you know, it looks like we have about 20 people still on here. So happy to have you guys pick our brains. Definitely visit the learn@arcsource.com website for more info on these sessions. You can also email myself at dave@arcsource.com or rohit@arcsource.com for more info. Yeah, so let us know if you guys have any questions. There's something coming in. Yeah, okay, so yes, Prashant, we will email you that prior webinar for sure. Yeah, I hope everybody's doing well. Work from home definitely lasted longer than I expected. I hope you guys have gotten to have a bite to eat during this webinar. Rohit and I have been talking. I'm going to definitely get my lunch right afterwards. Yeah, if we can be a resource to you guys in any way, we'd love to help you out and point you in the right direction with technologies and ideas. More about TeamViewer, Julie. Yeah, so basically it's based on simultaneous users. The team version of TeamViewer has, their base price is $200 a month for 3 people at once, and then it goes up from there. So I can get you more info, Julie, because I know you. And they don't specify the price at, you know, 20, 30 people, but they do have pricing if we talk to their sales rep. So I'll get you some more information on that. But generally speaking, it's going to be in the $50 a head per month for simultaneous use as we go up. And Dean, yes, happy to share the slide deck with you. I know I have your email address, so we'll send that out for sure. We're also going to send out a recording of the video for the webinar from today's presentation, and happy to share last week's as well. So, let's see. Okay, so question on comparing TeamViewer and Splashtop to RDP, and also Microsoft Teams and Slack. So I would start with the latter first. Microsoft Teams and Slack are really primarily about uh, meeting collaboration and sharing screens during a meeting presentation. Yes, you can do the whiteboard features. Even Zoom has a whiteboard feature or screen sharing features. The high performance remote control technologies is really what we're thinking about here. And TeamViewer and Splashtop will distinguish themselves partly because they're paid products engineered continuously to be high performance. They are all about optimizing the amount of data sent over the internet to reduce that to just the amount needed to make a great visual and kind of mouse presentation. They also allow you to take advantage of the hardware acceleration at the office. And where RDP will fall apart is on that latter part. RDP does not include the hardware acceleration. Although I do expect Microsoft to continue to make strides in this area. So, was there another question? Julie asked, what was the alternative to Frame? Was it Paperspace?
Yeah, it was Paperspace.
Yeah, so these are kind of what I would put in the category of BIM cloud or CAD cloud. These are technologies that ArcSource is working on either packaging or testing currently for some of our clients. But Paperspace provides a whole virtual environment such that all of the data and the processing power is in the cloud. And it's a fundamental shift. It's going to require high bandwidth, and it's also going to require, improved Autodesk software and data architecture over time to make it sing. But I think that there's exciting stuff in that space coming up.
And this will go hand in hand with the BIM 360 licensing. So if you can imagine you have a virtual computer in the cloud, that means you can easily port your BIM 360 license. All you do is log into that machine and you start working from there. So no need to have a licensing, network licensing setup, or it's all in the cloud then.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks for mentioning the licensing again, Rohit. It is on the horizon in 2021 when Autodesk is going to discontinue the network licensing model. And I think that's a bummer for some firms because some firms are highly optimized around usage percentage and, buying, 15 licenses for 20 regular users. But as a carrot, they're going to be offering 2 subscriptions for the price of 1 for every license. So, yeah. Sean is asking, how is TeamViewer Splashtop different from Microsoft Teams or Slack where you share? Sorry, I already answered that. My bad. Was there another question?
I don't think so. You have already answered all these. So
yeah, my question window just popped on my screen again. So yeah, okay. Yeah. So again, thanks for coming, everybody. Still a lot of people on here. Happy to answer more questions. We're really seeing a shift in the CAD BIM space. Actually, I was going to see if we would share the poll results from the attendees from earlier. It looks like half of you are from firms 11 or larger. 100% were rarely or ever working remotely before. So this definitely represents a big shift. 70% are using Revit, which is interesting. you know, definitely Revit wins in our space. We do still have several firms that are heavily focused on AutoCAD, but I think as the subscription licensing and as our students in architecture schools are being more educated in Revit, I think that will continue to shift. Interestingly, also 60% G Suite for the folks on this call. So yeah, fascinating for us to see that. Okay. Unless there's no more questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then I just want to thank everybody again for coming and for joining the webinar. I hope you got a lot of info and a lot of value out of it. And Rohit and I enjoyed presenting this one, especially in prepping for it. I think this is kind of where we like thinking the most and seeing the most about how we can optimize this stuff. So again, I hope it's been high value information, and again, look forward to being a resource with you. So I am going to say we're wrapping up at this point, and then again, thanks for everybody for coming out.